Hey guys, we're coming at you from eRide Central. We've got the Currus Panther here today. We're going to do a little bit of a tire change. So you might have knobby tires, you want to switch over to street. Maybe you have street tires, you want to switch over to knobbies. We're going to show you how to do it.
Yeah, this pretty much goes for pretty much any split rim tire out there. It's a pretty easy process, but a lot of times what we're finding with split rims is that the motor hub cable comes out the side where you open up the split rim. So in order to do a tire change, it's much easier to actually disconnect the motor hub from the controller. Sounds like it'd be a little bit more work, but it's actually going to be a lot easier in the long run. So we're going to go over the tools that you're going to need to do this tire change. You're going to need an Allen key set. This is the one that came on the EnoKim. I'm not going to use the one that traditionally comes with most of the scooters. It's a soft metal and this is a hardened steel, so I do prefer this much better. I got some scissors because I'm going to have to disconnect some cable ties here, or some zip ties. And I've also got a socket wrench set so I can get off the wheel nut lock, or the wheel nut. This is actually going to be a 13/16 size. It's kind of interesting. Everything else is a standard size on the scooter, except for this is going to be an imperial size. So I kind of thought that was odd there, but 13/16 is the right thing. You also are going to need a flathead screwdriver to get these wheel nut covers off. It's kind of interesting. Normally wheel nut covers are easily popped off. They're really on there soft. They normally just fall off naturally, but this is one where I actually had to use a flathead screwdriver to get them loose. So I've already got them loose, but you just basically shove it in there, get a little bit loose, and we'll just start diving right in. So first things first is I'm going to actually take off this deck cover. I've already loosened up most of these bolts just to show you how many there are. There are a lot of bolts on here. You're going to loosen them all up, and you're going to actually have to cut this little zip tie on the very front of it in order to get it off, because it actually prevents this thing from coming up. So we'll go ahead, start taking these all off. Most of them are all the same. These are all the same, except for these two front ones are going to be 4 millimeters, where these ones I believe are going to be 2 millimeters. So yeah, the only two bolts that actually have Loctite on it is going to be these two front bolts that are right next to the stem of it. If you can't get these loose, you just might have to apply a heat gun, a blow dryer onto it. Some people want to torch it. I think torching is a little bit too hot, so a heat gun is going to be a little bit better. And that way it just melts the Loctite and makes it easier to get it out. But luckily, we didn't have to do that. So here's the thing is go to take this deck off, and it starts to run into this zip tie right here. So that's what I'm going to do, is just disconnect and cut the zip tie right here. Pull that thing out. And then now the deck thing should just come right off of here. So I've got this whole deck out of here. This is actually pretty sweet. Honestly, this is one of the cleanest decks I've seen inside of a scooter. Sometimes there's a lot of jam packed in here. There's not a lot of room. This is a 60 volt, 35 amp hour battery, so this really is in here pretty nicely, and it's got a whole metal casing, which is really impressive because most of the time you see it with just that blue wrapping on there. So I'm actually kind of impressed with this. We're gonna have to actually disconnect this one zip tie right here too. There's a zip tie right here. So I'm gonna cut that thing off. There's a zip tie that goes all the way around this thing. And then this is where we're gonna see, this is where it's connected to here. So one thing is this is really a nice setup. Most things aren't all shrink wrapped in here, but every single thing, all these components, if you can see, they're actually shrink wrapped. So, but we are gonna disconnect the power now because these are shrink wrapped, so they're not just a plug and play thing. We just think it's gonna be safer. There's so much power that's running through these scooters that the last thing we want is to get shocked by it. It's not a fun situation. It could actually be really dangerous, so.
You guys are going to want to put some tape on the ends of these, because the last thing that you'd want is for those to touch together. So we'll grab some electrical tape. We'll just tape it up to keep them separated.
So one thing you want to do is after you disconnect the power is you want to turn the power on this thing and just drain out the rest of the juice. Oh, and then you see, as soon as we turned on that display, we had green readout, and then just you could see the voltage thing go down. So you want to make sure you you try to turn on the power, make sure all the power is expelled out of it, because there is some power held up in the controller that can actually end up shocking you. So one key thing, just make sure you drain the power. Pull off these little sheaves on there, make sure you save these for later. So the main reason why we're trying to disconnect the controller is so we have this wire free. So when we pop off the tire from the split rim, we can just pull it out of the wiring. Whereas if we had that wire on there, you can't pull the tire off. You have to push the tire off of the rim, which is much harder. This is going to be super simple. Basically what we're going to do is just take off the nuts that are around the split rim, pull off the rim, and we should be able to slide it right out. So for now, since we need to get this wire loose, we need to just start clipping the rest of these zip ties. So one thing you want to do is just take a few pictures. I like to take my camera out, take pictures of how the cables ran, so I can make sure that I run it the same way next time, because you don't want any cables hanging in a different spot, because they've really designed these scooters so when these tires are spinning 50 miles per hour, the last thing you want to happen is where a cable goes into the tire and gets shredded up. It's not going to be fun. You're going to have to be replacing a whole motor, which is a pretty expensive piece. Probably the second most expensive piece to a scooter besides the battery is going to be the motor hubs. We've got this wound up here. I'm going to bring this thing down in here. There's 2 zip ties on this side, so we're gonna want to take these zip ties off of here too. And just know that there's these 2 little holes. There's 3 holes. The zip ties are in these 2 front holes right here. So you just take those things out. Now we've got this whole thing loose on here. So now it's gonna be actually pretty easy. So next step is we're going to take off these wheel nut covers. Like I said, I've already loosened them up with the screwdriver. You don't have to pull them off completely. Just enough to pull off this locking nut right there. So you'd have to go. Make sure you get underneath it, because last thing you want to do is have this thing drop and bend the rotor. It's never fun to bend the rotor on these things. There's another one on here that's got a locking nut on this side, and there's one on the interior too. So this side you have to take off the bolt a little bit a little bit more than the other side. So pull that off. Has the same locking nut. Make sure you're gentle with it when you're pulling it out. So here we go. So this is it pulled off. Make sure you get this one. Pull that thing out to unlock it. This is where you see the split rim. Here's the motor hub nuts, and then here's the nuts for the split rim that are on the exterior. So we should be able to just pull those things out, and the split rim should just pop right off. But be careful not to bend the brake rotor. It's really easy to bend it, so you want to kind of set it down softly so that you don't bend it accidentally. So we've got this thing here. Like I said, be careful because you do not want to bend the brake rotor. So you're going to set this up. It's 4 millimeters on these edges, and we should just be able to start unscrewing all these exterior bolts. So should be able to just slide all these bolts out. Should pop right out. I'm going to pull this thing out here. So we got 6 of them, right? Now we should just be able to pull this thing out apart from each other. Kind of give it a jiggle, and easy enough. And this is why you take off this cable, because if you don't take this cable off, you got to push that out that way, or you just pull this thing out and you've got it already unwired and just pull that thing out like that. Easy enough. So that is the main reasoning why you want to disconnect that cable, because if it was plugged in, you can't do that. So you need to get this thing off of this rim, and it should just pop right out. So a couple things you can do is pull out the tire tube first, because the tube has the little valve stem that goes through there. So this was the old tube. We're going to put new tubes in it, but I wanted to be a little bit careful with this tube. Just in case I have some issues with the new tube, I just want to be able to use this as a backup and have it as a backup. This is from Free Motion Shop. They sell them on their website. They fit a lot of scooters. This will fit your your 011X. This will fit your Cabo Wolf King. This is a little bit different. You can do 90. Technically, if you're going to do a 011X, you can get the size 110. That's going to be a little bit better for you. But this is smooth rubber, or this is a street tire, and it's a stickier type of compound. So basically, this should improve turning at high speeds on the Currus Panther quite a bit. Off-roading tires are awesome, but they're really actually not great to be taking tight turns on it. That's why we've seen some people review about it, saying that they felt unstable on the Currus Panther at high speeds. Well, it comes stock with off-roading tires, so that's why we're changing it to street tires, so we can show you how much smoother it rides. So it's a directional tire. It's going to show you what way it's going to be spinning rotation. So we're going to want this spinning like this way. This side is actually the side without the brake rotor. So if you want to think about this, is if this is the side without the brake rotor is on the left side, you want the arrow facing that way when we do it. So this is how we want to do it. It's a little bit easier to stick the tube in first. So you're going to want to put this in here. Some people suggest putting a little bit of air in their tire actually, which I might end up doing here. There's a reason why you want to add a little bit of air into your tire before you just shove it in there. You want to build some body with it. You want to get it to form to the shape so that you can make sure it's laying in the tire really well, so you do not pinch it when you put it all together, because nothing worse than putting this whole tire together, you do the whole job, and you end up popping the tire, or popping the tube because it wasn't set in there well. This is where we're going good. Now we've got it lined up right. So we've got the tire rotation right. Now I've got to line up this valve stem with this hole that's coming out here. So I'm going to line that valve stem up there. Now I just want to be careful as I'm inserting this rim in here that I'm not going to get the edges of the tube. And I'm just going to go slowly, but see? The last thing you want to do is pinch those, so you just want to make sure you are clearing that without pinching or without breaking the tube. So this is probably the trickiest part, is you got this thing set in here flat, but now when we collapse this in, we want to make sure we try to get this tube avoiding this whole area so it doesn't get punctured as we pinch this all together. That's why it's important just to almost try to get out as much of the air as you can now. So I was just trying to have Seth help me to get some air out of there. You want to do that to build form out when you're first setting it up, just so you have it lined up correctly. But now you just want to make sure that this whole thing, there is no rubber edge along this rim part, because you will absolutely pinch it when you go to collapse that rim. So as long as that's clear, because you can see there's a lip on it, it's going to sit inside of that lip. So as long as it's not sitting inside of that lip, we should be good to go to not pinch that tire, that tube that we just did so much work to get in there. So we're going to line this up now with those bolts, and we're going to drop this through there. Make sure to drop that cable in through there, and then we're going to set this up here like this. And if you see right here from the top, you can line that up pretty easily.
Alright guys, it looks like we're ready to put the hub bolts back in, and one thing I wanted to just mention really quickly is that we didn't notice a lot of Loctite on there, if any. If there was any Loctite on the old hub bolts, you're going to want to remove that completely. It's not a bad idea to also use some paint thinner or some other solvent, maybe a wire brush, anything that you can do to get as much of that old Loctite off, because that will interfere with the adherence of the new Loctite. Now there's two different types of Loctite that are applicable to this. There's a blue Loctite and then there's a red Loctite. Red Loctite is a permanent Loctite. It's for things that you never want to come apart again. For this application, we're going to want to use blue because, hey, next week we want to put those knobbies back on, right? So we are going to use blue Loctite, and it doesn't take much. I'll go ahead and let Andrew take over, and he'll kind of show you how to apply that.
Basically, you just get some thread locker. This one's blue. The brand that most people know about is Loctite, and you don't have to put that much at all. You just literally just need to put on this one, because it's a little bit longer bolt, you're just going to put like a little bit of a drop on one side of it. Nothing too crazy, and that should be plenty on there for you. And just like when you're doing a tire rim, you don't want to just over tighten one side versus the other side. You kind of want to all get them in there gradually, and then we will gradually bring them all in there together. And in the future, you can always just use a heat gun to get it a little bit looser if you're having issues with it. Blue Loctite, you can typically break it open with your hands, just applying some pressure to it. But red Loctite, yeah, you pretty much really should apply a heat gun to it if you ever need to remove that in the future. So you don't even have to put it all the way up and down it. As long as it's just applied to some of the screw, you should be good to go. And you got plenty of time to work. You don't have to rush feeling like, oh my goodness, I put Loctite on and I need to run as fast as I can. You got plenty of time. The Loctite doesn't cure for 24 hours. I did forget to bring my armadillos. I do prefer armadillos over slime, but slime does do the trick. Right now, I don't think I'm actually going to apply any of the stuff in there right now, but we do have a bottle of slime, but I would prefer to put armadillos in it just because I feel it's a little bit stronger. So remember where your wiring's at last time? This thing came straight out on this side, so I'm going to go in and install it that way. And this side is going to be the brake disc. It's really easy to remember that. We're just going to kind of shove it on in there. Make sure you just are gentle with how you're putting this thing on here, because you definitely want to make sure that you don't bend the brake disc when you're putting it up. So you technically should use a torque wrench for this, or you could just really hand tighten it and just try not to go too tight. You want to definitely bring it on tight, but not too crazy tight. And now, as you can hear, no, we did not bend the rotor, so that's a good sign. If you bent the rotor, you'd start hearing the scraping right here, and you might have to take that off and redo it. But man, that tire looks good. We've got the front going on. We saved this putty, so it's kind of interesting. This thing had like a weird putty. It wasn't silicone, but this actually causes it to be waterproof, which this is probably one of the best waterproof casings I've actually seen on a scooter. I'm pretty impressed with that. So we'll go ahead and start taking apart the front tire now. Pretty much everything was identical in the back to the front. The only thing that was different was when I was trying to pull this thing off, there was too much pressure on here. So I had to actually loosen up these 6 bolts and these 6 bolts to give it some give, and so it loosened it up and I was able to drop the tire, but at first I could not drop the tire until I loosened these 6 bolts.
So yeah guys, once you drop that front tire, the process is basically the same thing as the back tire. You're going to split the rim. You're going to want to make sure that you don't pinch that tube. That's the most important thing. I can't stress that enough. Both of us have been bitten by having pinched tubes and it's not fun. So yeah, repeat the process that you did on the back tire, and then we'll go ahead and show you putting it back onto the front. All right guys, while Andrew's getting that rest of that tire on the front, I'm going to go ahead and get these connections connected back up to the controller. So this is my rear motor. I went ahead and made sure that I mapped the correct wire colors based on the photo that we took. And what you want to do here is you want to make sure that you have the sleeve, and then you get your shrink wrap. This happens to be a 1/4 inch shrink wrap. I did have to use the scissors and just kind of make it a little bit bigger so that it would fit. So it is a tight fit, but what you're going to do is you're going to connect these guys back up, and then you're just going to push that shrink wrap over. And if you kind of twist when you do this, it might help a little bit just to kind of get it to go over the other side there. And once you've got that all together, so now I've got these 3 guys. They're all ready to go ahead and shrink. So I'm going to get my trusty heat gun going.
So this one's going to be a little bit trickier. One thing you want to remember is where you put the little spacer pieces at. The side that has the motor hub cable is going to have a spacer on it. So there's going to have one flat spacer, and it's going to have a wheel locking nut. Well, not a wheel locking nut, but a placement nut holder on there. And I'm going to show you kind of how I get this thing on. So you got to make sure you line this up with the brake disc, the brake pads, so you don't bend that rotor. So we're going to apply blue Loctite here in a second, but let me get this side on first too. We should be getting the Currus NF Plus here soon to review as well, which that is very similar to the Currus Panther. Not quite as big of amp hours, but it has a carbon fiber handlebar, which is pretty sweet, and more lights. And now, here's this slight little noise, but nothing crazy. The ones you gotta worry about is when it goes. So this one will just burn off. It's pretty easily. Remember how the wire was? We had this wire zip tied right here on two parts, and we had a zip tie right here on the top. So the zip ties was all the way up here. There was 3 of them. So we're gonna zip tie these up here. Good to go. Man, that's a clean job. I'm gonna zip tie these things back together.
So, like I was saying, these guys were just a little bit too tight. I was using the 1/4 inch heat shrink. These shrink down in half, 2 to 1 to 1/8 of an inch. So if you notice, it's really tough to go over. But what I found is that if you just use a pair of scissors or something like that, you can kind of just stretch it a little bit, make it just a little bit larger.
Moment of truth is we're going to turn this thing on. So I'm going to turn this to 1. We're going to do this again. There's that. That's the rear tire. That's good. So yeah, that's pretty awesome, man. We did the tire change, we got it done. And we'll start buttoning this whole deck back up. You just kind of line this back up, drop this in, find the holes you're trying to match up with, and you're good to go. There we go. So we'll start putting in these. Like I said, all the bolts were the same ones, except for the 2 front ones were Loctited. I'm not going to Loctite all of them, I'm just going to Loctite the same 2 front ones. Just because in case I need to get back in the deck, I don't want to have to break them all open. I've got all these bolts. I'm only worried about Loctiting the 2 front ones. Those are the only 2 ones that had Loctite on it. The deck is not important to Loctite. The reason why is I'm going to want to access this in the future. I don't want to have to break through all these bolts, and this isn't going to kill me if one of these bolts comes loose. It's just on here. I do want to Loctite stuff in the motor hub, on the tires, because I don't want that stuff to split. And what we have seen in the past is there's so much movement going on the tires. If you don't Loctite the split rims, you'll start to see those bolts come loose, and if those bolts comes loose, they start to shake and they start to shear the bolt areas in there. So that's the last place you want any type of bolt movement. So yeah, only gonna Loctite the fronts, and all these other ones will be good to go.
All right, guys, that wasn't hard, right? What did it take us? Maybe 2 hours? I think it took us about 2 hours. So plan your time accordingly. This is going to be a great upgrade, I think. If you plan on taking this thing to its top speed, you definitely want to do the tire change. The other thing that you're going to want to do is actually the steering damper as well, which we're going to bring to you next. All right, Andrew, why don't you tell them what's going on if they do buy a Currus Panther?
Yeah, if you mention eRide Life when you buy a Currus Panther, you'll get a free bag and an extra set of tires with tubes in them as well, and you can choose whatever one you want. If you want more off-road tires, you can choose that, but we do suggest you getting some smooth pavement tires since it already comes with off-roading tires. If you do decide to buy some tires, please do use our link. That's the only way that you can track it, and we hope that you do want to support our channel after we did this for a couple hours for you. We would have actually slammed this together pretty quickly if it was just us and just doing it for ourselves, but we wanted to make sure we showed a professional job for you guys so you know what to do. And it's not that hard. It really shouldn't only took us 2 hours because we're filming it, but honestly, if we were just running, gunning on it, we could probably do it within an hour. So just plan accordingly and get out there and wear some safety gear.
Yeah.
Good thing is we added some air to the tires and we don't hear anything hissing, so I think we're good. We can pinch it with the split rims. It would have been a nightmare if we did, but we pumped them up to 41 PSI. You can go up to 50 PSI on these tires, but I like it a little bit softer, not too soft, but not too hard, just like Goldilocks. And I'm about to take off on this thing.
If this video helped you guys out, please help us out. Hit that subscribe button. At the least, smash that like button. And we'll see you on the next video.
Take care, guys.
Cheers.